For 24 years, she crushed lawyers and ruined lives, until one man turned the tables and had her arrested in her own courtroom. The air inside the Jefferson County Courthouse in Birmingham, Alabama, was heavy, not from the sticky southern heat, but from something darker. A truth that had seeped into the walls over the years, silent but suffocating. Anyone who stepped through those oak doors knew the rules in Judge Meredith Langford's courtroom. She rarely glanced up from her papers, her sharp eyes slicing through lawyers like they were nothing. Her voice stayed calm, never loud, but the power behind it crushed anyone who dared challenge her. For 24 years. She'd ruled from the bench, not the kind of judge remembered with awards or honored in textbooks, the kind talked about in whispers at bar meetings. Attorneys, especially black attorneys, knew what they were facing when their case landed in her courtroom. Her rulings always tilted the same way. The objections she allowed or denied followed a pattern no one could prove, but everyone knew Teague. And today, that pattern was about to break. Darnell Hayes walked in, his dress shoes tapping against the marble floor. He'd been here before, but today was different. He wasn't just another defense lawyer in Langford's courtroom. He wasn't just another name on her list. Today, he had something she didn't expect. At Wood 48, Darnell had built his career on taking the cases no one else wanted. His reputation stretched far beyond Alabama. His skill at dismantling prosecutions made him a target for judges like Langford. But that never slowed him down. The only thing that did not give him pause was the look in her eyes when he walked toward the defense table. She already hated him, not because of the case, not because of anything he'd said, but because of who he was. Darnell felt the weight of the moment press down on him. This wasn't just about his client Tyrone Wilkes, a man falsely accused of armed robbery. This wasn't just about proving innocence. This was about everything else. And he wasn't leaving this courtroom without making that clear. "Mr. Hayes," Judge Langford said, barely glancing up from her papers, "you're already on thin ice in my courtroom. Don't waste my time today." Double asterisk. There was no reason for her to say that. They hadn't even started. Darnell tightened his grip on his briefcase, but kept his face blank. "I'll try not to, Your Honor." Langford smirked. "Good, because I have a full docket, and I don't need theatrics." She turned to the prosecution, an eager young assistant DA named Philip Calloway, fresh out of law school, desperate to impress the wrong people. "The state is ready, Your Honor," Calloway said, shooting a smug look at Darnell. Of course they were ready. They were always ready when the case was stacked against a black man. Darnell's client sat beside him, shoulders slumped, hands folded, the posture of someone who'd been beaten down by the system too many times. Darnell leaned in slightly. "We're ready too," he said, loud enough for the whole room to hear. Judge Langford exhaled sharply. "Let's get this over with." Well, the trial began, but it wasn't a trial. It was a performance. And Judge Langford was the star. Every objection Darnell raised was dismissed, without thought. Every time Calloway fumbled, she guided him, like a teacher helping a favorite student. The jury noticed, the spectators noticed, but no one dared speak up. Except Darnell. He watched her, the way her lips curled when he spoke, the barely hidden disgust in her eyes. This wasn't just bias, it was something worse. Something he'd spent 8 years preparing for, but the courtroom didn't know that yet. Darnell had faced hostile judges before, but this was different. Langford wasn't even pretending. To be fair, every time he spoke, she cut him off. Every strong argument he made, she brushed aside like a bothersome fly. Courtrooms had rules, lawyers argued, judges ruled, juries decided. But in this courtroom, Langford had already picked the verdict. Darnell saw the jury shifting uncomfortably. Even the white jurors who might have walked in with their own biases couldn't ignore what was happening. But Judge Langford didn't care. She doubled down. Her words grew sharper each time she spoke to him. "Mr. Hayes, you're testing my patience. Mr. Hayes, if you raise one more baseless objection, I'll hold you in contempt. Mr. Hayes, this is not a lecture hall. If you want a grandstand, do it somewhere else." Darnell kept his face calm, but inside, his blood burned. Not because she was insulting him, he could handle that, but because she was making it personal. And that was her mistake. Still, he needed her to keep talking, to keep exposing herself. "Your Honor," he said, voice steady. "The prosecution just introduced evidence that was not disclosed in discovery. That's a clear Brady violation. I move for a mistrial." Judge Langford leaned back, adjusting her glasses with exaggerated boredom. "Denied." Darnell blinked, not from surprise, but strategy. He let the silence hang just long enough. "To be clear, Your Honor, you're refusing to acknowledge a Brady violation?" Langford's lips thinned. "I said denied, Mr. Hayes." He could feel the courtroom shift. Reporters scribbled faster. Whispers rose in the gallery. She saw it too. Her eyes darkened, and for the first time, she locked onto him. "You are dangerously close to being held in contempt, Mr. Hayes." Darnell tilted his head slightly. "For what, Your Honor? Asking the court to follow the law?" Slam! Her gavel cracked like thunder. "That's enough," she snapped. "One more word and I'll have you removed." The room went dead silent. Darnell could hear his own heartbeat. But he wasn't nervous. This was exactly what he needed. Beside him, his client, Tyrone Wilkes, clenched his fists under the table. "Man, don't let her do this to you," he muttered. Darnell didn't glance over. "I have nothing further, Your Honor," he said smoothly, taking his seat. Langford scoffed, acting like she'd won. But what she didn't realize? The game had just begun, and she'd played right into his hands. Darnell sat still, face unreadable. He knew when to push and when to pull back, just enough to let someone destroy themselves. And Judge Langford was doing exactly that. The jury exchanged glances. Reporters scribbled furiously. Everyone could feel it now. The shift, the discomfort, the slow, damning exposure out of a judge who'd grown too comfortable in her power. But Langford wasn't backing down. She straightened in her chair, voice icy. "Mr. Calloway, continue." Philip Calloway cleared his throat, rattled. He was young, but not stupid. He saw what was happening too. "Yes, Your Honor." He turned to the witness stand where a nervous store clerk sat. "Mr. Thomas, can you confirm the defendant, Tyrone Wilkes, was the man you saw at the robbery?" The old man hesitated. Darnell leaned forward slightly. He'd seen this before, the kind of hesitation that meant doubt. But Langford wasn't interested in doubt. "Answer the question," she pressed. The witness flinched. I think so." Darnell stood immediately. "Objection, Your Honor. That is not a definitive statement." Langford didn't hesitate. "Overruled." Darnell exhaled, shaking his head just enough for the jury to notice. He let Calloway fumble through a few more questions before rising for cross-examination. Darnell approached the witness stand, voice steady. "Mr. Thomas, you think you saw my client that night. How sure are you?" The man licked his lips. I thought—" Langford cut in. "Move on, Mr. Hayes." Darnell turned, slowly, meeting her eyes. This was too blatant. Too obvious. "I'd like the witness to answer, Your Honor." I said move on. Darnell didn't blink. "For the record, Your Honor, you are preventing the witness from clarifying his own statement." Langford's face twitched. "I'm warning you, Mr. Hayes." Darnell smiled, just slightly. "I understand, Your Honor." He turned back to the witness. "No further questions." He walked back to the defense table, slow, deliberate. The tension in the room had shifted again, twisting tighter. Langford knew she'd lost control. And Darnell? He knew it was time. Because he wasn't here just to win this case. He was here to end her. His fingers brushed against the stack of documents in his briefcase, the ones that would change everything. And just as he gripped them, the courtroom doors slammed open. The heavy double doors swung wide, the sound snapping every head toward the entrance. 2 federal agents in dark suits strode in, movements sharp, purposeful. The courtroom went dead silent. Darnell didn't react, just smoothed his tie, folded his hands. Judge Langford's eyes flickered. Confusion, then irritation. What is the meaning of this? The lead agent, a tall man with a clipped tone, flashed his badge. Judge Meredith Langford, we need to speak with you immediately. Her jaw tightened. I am in the middle of a trial. The agent didn't budge. It's urgent. Darnell saw it, the flicker of fear in her expression, quickly buried under that familiar arrogance. She squared her shoulders. This is highly inappropriate. It will have to wait. The second agent stepped forward, voice booming. This is a federal matter. It cannot wait. A ripple of whispers exploded through the gallery. Even the jury, sworn to impartiality, leaned in. The prosecutor, Calloway, shifted awkwardly. Should we take a recess, Your Honor? Langford's fingers dug into the bench. Number. We are not taking a recess. The defense has wasted enough. Judge Langford. The agent cut in. We have a warrant for your arrest. A collective gasp tore through the room. For the first time in 24 years, Judge Meredith Langford lost control of her courtroom. Darnell let the moment breathe. Let the shock sink into every corner of the room. Then, slowly, deliberately, he stood. He turned, scanning the jury, the gallery, the reporters scribbling furiously. Finally, he faced her. Your Honor, he said, voice calm. I believe you just denied my motion for a mistrial, but it seems this trial is now the least of your concerns. Langford's face drained of color. The lead agent stepped forward, unfolding a document. Meredith Langford, you are under arrest for bribery, abuse of power, obstruction of justice, and civil rights violations under federal law. The room erupted. Gasps, shouts, somewhere a stifled cheer. The jury sat frozen, eyes darting between Darnell and the woman on the bench. Langford looked at the agents, at the warrant, then at Darnell. And for the first time, she truly saw him. Not just another attorney, but the man who had been waiting for this moment. Mr. Hayes, she said, voice unsteady. Darnell picked up his briefcase, stepped forward, eyes locked on hers. I told you, I follow the law, even when the law fails people like me. The agent moved to the bench. Judge, you need to stand. For a heartbeat, she didn't move. Then, she did. And when the cuffs clicked around her wrists, the courtroom wasn't just watching, they were witnessing a reckoning. The sound echoed, sharp, final. For Pakin 24 years, Judge Langford had ruled this room with an iron grip. Attorneys feared her. Defendants knew they didn't stand a chance. The system had protected her. But now, she stood in the very spot where she'd condemned countless others. Wrists bound, power crumbling. The courtroom was come electric. A once-in-a-lifetime white moment no one had seen coming. The jury, the gallery, even Calloway, the eager prosecutor who'd worshipped her. All stunned, silent. Darnell let the moment stretch. For years he had built this moment. Piece by piece, evidence by evidence, every bribe, every rigged ruling, every case she'd twisted to her will. He had documented it all, patient, calculating, knowing that one day the weight of her corruption would be collapse under itself. And today, that day had come. The federal agent unfolded the warrant, voice cutting through the stunned silence. Meredith Langford, You are under arrest for violations of the Civil Rights Act, bribery, obstruction of justice, and abuse of judicial power. You have the right to remain silent." Langford finally found her voice. "This is outrageous." The agent didn't blink. "Tell it to your lawyer." A wave of murmurs crashed through the gallery. Reporters scrambled, cameras flashing, capturing the way her hands trembled, the way her once imposing stature shrunk in real time. Then she turned to Darnell. "You!" she spat, voice raw with rage and disbelief. Darnell lifted his chin. "Number. This is justice." For the first time in his career, the balance had shifted. Langford tried to straighten, to summon that old authority, but it was gone. The irony was brutal. For years, she'd preached about accountability, respect for the law, from her untouchable bench. Now she stood before the same system she'd broken. The agents moved her toward the doors, but not before one final humiliation. A court officer, someone who'd once jumped at her every command, held the door open for her, like she was just another defendant. Langford hesitated, then stepped through. The doors slammed shut, and just like that, she was gone. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. Darnell exhaled, hands resting on the defense table. Beside him, Tyrone Wilkes turned, eyes wide. "Man," he shook his head, "I thought people like her never paid for what they did." Darnell glanced at the empty judge's bench. "They do," he said quietly. "But the real lesson, that's still coming." The gallery erupted, whispers of disbelief, murmurs of grim satisfaction. The jury exchanged glances as if confirming they'd all witnessed the same unthinkable moment. Darnell stayed still. He'd fought battles before, but this was the long game. Years of patience, years of evidence, years of waiting for Langford's corruption to finally outweigh her protection. Justice had arrived, but Tyrone Wilkes was still in handcuffs. Langford was gone, but her rigged trial wasn't over. Darnell turned, locking eyes with Philip Calloway. The young prosecutor, once so smug under Langford's shadow, now looked pale, shaken, gripping his notes like a drowning man. His safety net had just vanished. Darnell cleared his throat, addressing the shucked new judge, a greying, no-nonsense man with a reputation for fairness. "Your Honor, given today's developments, I move for immediate dismissal of all charges against my client." The judge folded his hands. "On what grounds, Mr. Hayes?" Darnell turned to the jury. "On the grounds that this trial was poisoned from the start. Judge Langford's arrest proves what we've known. She was never impartial. Evidence was hidden. Rulings were rigged. My client never stood a chance." He let that sink in. Then, now that the architect of this injustice is in handcuffs, the only just outcome is to undo the damage she caused. The judge studied him, then nodded. "I agree." A heavy pause. Then, "Charges against Tyrone Wilkes are dismissed. Bailiff, remove his restraints." For a second, no one moved. Then Tyrone exhaled, a breath he'd been holding for but years. The cuffs clicked open, and for the first time in too long, his hands were free. The moment was so thick, even Calloway didn't object. He just sat there, staring blankly, like a man who'd lost something far bigger than a case. Tyrone rubbed his wrists, turning to Darnell, voice low. "I don't even know what to say." Darnell clapped his shoulder. "You don't have to." Today the system had worked, not because it was fair, but because someone fought to make it fair. Tyrone stood, looking around the courtroom that had nearly swallowed him whole. Then, without another word, he walked out. Darnell followed, the weight of today pressing against his chest, because this wasn't just about Tyrone, it was about every outer life Langford had ruined. Every innocent man she'd railroaded, every bribe she'd taken, every law she'd twisted. This was just the beginning. Darnell had won today, but tomorrow? He had work to do, because there were more Langfords out there. And he wasn't done yet. If you believe in real justice, in holding power accountable, don't just watch. Make your voice heard.